Welcome to another episode of the Tobago House of Assembly's Post-Executive Council Media Briefing. This week, the Chief Secretary Kelvin Charles, who's also the Secretary for Education, Innovation and Energy, addresses the media.
The first issue that I would treat with has to do with a news item that was carried in respect of the Speyside Anglican School. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, every year we normally during the vacation period engage in school repairs. This year was no exception. And we normally would take a month and we would treat with all the priority issues as they impact our schools, both primary and secondary. This year, we had to find $15 million and prioritize those expenditures, as opposed to last year when we spent $13 million. To put that in its context, we are operating in this financial year with a reduced budget of $185 million overall in respect of the Tobago House of Assembly. That notwithstanding, we are spending $2 million more than we did spend last year. Now, I am proud and I'm satisfied that all schools, both primary and secondary, were in an adequate state of repair and therefore were ready for the reopening of schools. As a matter of fact, this is Trinidad and Tobago. You would have seen a list, I'm sure, coming from another place, indicating how many schools remained unopened. In the Tobago scenario, that was not so. And even if one were to admit, which I'm not doing, that all our schools were not ready, we are talking about 42 schools, and therefore 41 would have been ready if you take the view that one wasn't quite ready. No mention was made of the 41 schools in that news item. But an attempt was made to give the impression that what was represented in that news item was in fact the average situation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we would have been doing, or we would have done a disservice, not only to Tobago, but to those local contractors and to those persons in the division who would have labored extensively to get those schools ready in the time period. As a matter of fact, even your humble servant on Sunday night was visiting schools to ensure that schools were ready. And in that regard, I wish to pay homage to some teachers that I met at some of the schools on Sunday night, seeking to make their classrooms ready for Monday. And most of the times, these things go unheeded. So I want to commend those teachers and principals who up to Sunday night was there seeking to make ready their classrooms and their schools to accept their charges Monday morning. Now, on Monday, of course, we would naturally, as part of the process, seek to get feedback from principals and so on, whether there were any issues. Because let's face it, you may leave home on morning, and when you return on afternoon, you may find that some plumbing issue goes awry, because that is the nature of plumbing. So when we got the report that there may have been an issue at that school, and I say may have been, because the truth be told, if you do your investigation, you would realize it was instigated because there were students at school, and even the clip, you saw students in their school uniforms. That should say something. But be that as it may, we then decided that we have to treat obviously with the situation. So we would have dispatched a potential contractor to the site. Clearly, it would take some time to get up there. We're talking about almost another end of the island. But even so, because we were uncertain as to the real reason for the disruption, we had a plan B, and we didn't wait for the final execution of Plan A to put Plan B in place. So we decided that we would also send 2 portable toilets up because we weren't sure what the issue. And the impression was given that those toilets represented the fundamental solution. That was far from the fact. And perhaps, just perhaps, if one attempted to call the division and to seek clarification, the information would have been provided. Because the idea was, just in case the problem was a little more difficult than anticipated, at least there was an option that could have been exercised. And I take this opportunity to advise that the following day, which was Tuesday, by 10 o'clock, the job was completed. And the students were able to use the toilets by break time, 10 o'clock. And I urge you to ask some questions, not to me, but as part of your investigation. And you would be surprised to discover what caused that problem. You will be surprised. I can assure you of that. So that has to do with that. Another matter which I would just mention has to do with the Scarborough RC School. Because I did see a video purporting to show water and persons sweeping out water Tuesday morning because rain fell in a particular way on Monday night. Now that school cost $85 million. And as I was saying to somebody recently, where I live, not where I'm now housed, but where I live, if the rain falls too heavily and the wind, I have to sweep water from my veranda. So that it may not be a structural issue as such. It may very well be the nature of the rainfall as well as the nature of the winds. That notwithstanding, of course, it's a new school, and if there is any defect, there's the whole issue of the defect liability period. We shall seek to treat with that. But it's almost as if persons were happy, exalted even, to make a play to show that a problem. And what concerns me as Chief Secretary now is that what kind of society are we founding? If after 56 years of independence, the emphasis will be on showing something that might be an exception and not placing any emphasis at all on what is good, what is desirable, and what has been achieved. We would be shortchanging ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, if we do not take stock of what happens on social media and some of the mainstream media. Now, the other issue that I want to treat with before I get into the other issues has to do with the Lambeau situation. I'm calling it the Lambeau situation because it was sensationalized. And again, the challenge is that I didn't see another side to that story. Meaning, I didn't see any perspectives, any persons who were interviewed, other than the guy who was there leading the cameras around. And I take this opportunity, therefore, to place on record the situation as I know it. Now, that spot, as you know, is a no vending spot. And of course, over the years, it has been allowed to happen. Because interestingly, when the depot lower down was opened, there was this gentleman who built a small shed and covered it. Because his argument was that he would normally catch 10 pounds of fish, a small catch, and therefore he really couldn't, as we would say in local parlance, go down there and fight up among those who selling hundreds of pounds of fish. So he preferred to stay there. Over time, what happened is that others moved in. But more than that, not only did they move in, you may or may not know that there was a fight at one time because others felt they had a prescriptive right more than he did, and he was displaced. Fast forwarding now, so that after several complaints, and if you speak to the police, you'll get some idea, it was decided that the sign which was taken down by person or persons unknown had to be re-erected. And that is the disturbing part, because to erect that sign had to be erected under police watch. So whilst the impression was being given that the THA was probably being callous, the fundamental issue that we need to deal with as a community, as an island, is how did we reach here, where to put up or to erect a no vending sign? It has to be done under police protection. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen, and what that portends in respect of the kind of society that we are building. And I'm sure those of us who are aware would know that the last murder committed in Tobago and in Lambeau had its genesis right there. Had its genesis right there. And therefore, it would have been a serious neglect of our duty of care to the people generally of Tobago if we allowed the unsavory activities that take place there under the guise of selling fish. Now, selling the fish is not so much the issue, It's the unsavory activities that accompany the selling of fish. And we saw recently what that can lead to. The death of one young man and the possible incarceration of others. Nowhere in the story, ladies and gentlemen, was this perspective offered. When I saw the newscast, I called the assemblyman for the area and asked if he was interviewed. The answer was no. I called the Secretary for Fisheries and Food Production and so on and asked if he was interviewed. The answer was no. Well, I didn't call the president of the Lambeau Fishing Association, but in speaking to the assemblyman for the area, he assured me that she was aware and that she was in favor of the action. As a matter of fact, it was partly because of her advocacy that was done. And I'm also advised that on the day in question, both the president and a member of staff of the Division of Fisheries and Food Production went on the scene, and they were berated with obscenities by persons on that site. So that a question or two would have revealed that side of things. They were berated with obscenities. That is the society that we have to be careful that by either conscious design or unconscious actions, we do not support. Because all of us have to live here. And if it gets out of hand, we can talk police, we can talk anything else, we can blame the THA, you can blame Chief Secretary Kelvin Charles. At the end of the day, prevention is always better than cure. Because we have a saying in Tobago, most of you may not know it because you're young. You don't know where wind has come from for lean foul tail. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I shall now proceed to some of the more favorable issues that I would wish to advise the national community about, including Tobago. There was indeed what I consider, especially at the primary level, a very satisfactory attendance record. I'm advised that over 70% of our primary schools had 100% attendance of students and teachers on the first day. And I would therefore like to take this opportunity to applaud those principals and the teachers of those schools, as well as the parents, in ensuring that those their children went out to school, and in fact the teachers, in the context of their responsibility, would have also done what they ought to have done. Now, in respect of this term, a fundamental thing will be happening, because early in this term, in next week, the tentative date is Thursday, there shall be a principals' retreat of all schools, primary, secondary, etc., where the opportunity will be taken to engage in some leadership empowerment and some target setting, among others. Now, you would have been students at schools, including secondary schools. So from your own experience, I am sure you would have recognized that there is a correlation between the quality of performance of a school and the strength of its leadership. Where leadership is weak, then performance is not as strong. And in that regard, we have a responsibility to work with our principals and senior personnel to ensure that they develop the skill sets required as they discharge their responsibilities. More than that, as we seek to clinically improve the performance levels of our schools, we need to get into some specifics in respect of target setting, and therefore the principals would be engaged in that kind of activity so that they can benchmark their arrangements and their performance standards and targets and match those with the appropriate strategies and activities that they would need to employ. So that, and we're doing that early in the term so that that will guide their performance over the school year. As you may know, because I think I may have mentioned it to you already, all schools are expected to develop school improvement plans, and therefore in this regard, that will provide the context for this kind of target setting to which I've just referred. And therefore, supervisors and so on will be working with these principals over time, if only to, as it were, make sure that those teachers and schools and principals remain faithful to the process. At the end of the day, we want our students to be able to rub shoulders with their colleagues in Trinidad. And teachers are key practitioners in the system, principals as well, senior teachers, heads of departments and so on. And we will do what we have to do to bring them up to speed, provide them with the exposure and the training and so on. And it was in that context that whilst we didn't get a building, we didn't construct a building, I should say, we sought to convert Marden House into a space that can facilitate teacher development, teacher professionalism. One of the initiatives that we will introduce in this school year is what we'll call an accelerated learning program. It will be voluntary because we don't want to take the position that all schools and all teachers must do it. And because we want the parents to be involved, we're making it voluntary. The design we're still working out, but the idea is that those students who demonstrate the potential to be accelerated will be provided with the opportunity so to do. We want to move away from the approach which seems to suggest that one size fits all, so that there's a generic teaching strategy for any class, and you teach to the middle. And the bright will survive because you're teaching to the middle. The middle will get ahead. Less than that, in some trouble. And at the end of the day, we have to find all kinds of mechanisms to moderate that. what we want are those that can be accelerated must be given the opportunity to be truly accelerated. So we're doing that. Now, this term as well, the plan is to open our first, and I hope only suspension center. It is one of the things that would have plagued me and agonized me since I came to the office, because we have situations where students are suspended, they go home without supervision, they come back unchanged, sometimes they are suspended again, and there is a downward spiral to their behavior. At last, we have been able to find a building, and a program will soon be rolled out that will facilitate these students so that they can be, as it were, exposed to a different kind of environment where whatever may account for their behavior, we can diagnose and we can treat, and at the same time provide them with some learning opportunities, which would include opportunities for learning vocational and technical skill sets. Ladies and gentlemen, there's an interesting development which I am happy to share with you. I have been talking for a little while about the fact that we were going to be constructing some ECC centers, but it was with IADB funding, and Tobago House of Assembly is a sovereign entity, and the practice has not been for an entity like the Tobago House of Assembly to be an executing agency for the IADB. However, in June of this year, on the 29th of June, officials of the THA did meet with officials of the Ministry of Education, and at that meeting, the following matters were addressed. Issues regarding the governance of the loan and the varying roles of Trinidad vis-a-vis Tobago. 2, the impact of any arrangement on funds, since we would have been concerned about the amount of that funding which would have been spent on administration. And thirdly, the legal implications, if you wish, relating to the THA's management of all loan funding coming from an institution like the IDB to be spent in Tobago. I'm happy to advise that after those discussions in June, a new project profile was sent by the Ministry of Education to the Ministry of Planning to be submitted to Cabinet, where all the money that should be used for Tobago should be spent in Tobago. And more importantly, that the governance arrangements for the project should be totally in the hands of the THA. And what this means is that for the first time, the THA will become the executing agency for an IDB project in Trinidad and Tobago, but that relates to Tobago. I think this, in a sense, is exciting news, and therefore I eagerly look forward to before the end of this calendar year, to turn in the sod for at least 2 of these ECE projects in Tobago. We do hope that we can fast track the necessary arrangements, because it's IDB funding and there are certain prerequisites. It's not your own money, so you have to satisfy them that you are ready to draw down. But I'm optimistic that before the end of the calendar year, we should at least begin construction of those schools. There was another exciting event that took place earlier today. Some of you were privileged to be there, but I think it really was, in a sense, a red letter day for us in Tobago. And that was where a memorandum of understanding was signed between the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment of the Tobago House of Assembly and the China Railway Construction Company of China in respect of a training arrangement that would seek to provide expert and sophisticated experiences to some of our local engineers in Tobago. So that, in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, the company has agreed to train and expose engineers employed or selected by the Assembly to best practices, and you could add to that contemporary practices in project engineering, design, construction management, and project management. And indeed, I would have mentioned earlier this morning that two of the projects that I saw in China when I was there last year really excited me in respect of the possibilities for development of our people. And I immediately engaged the company officials in respect of the possibility of providing training. And after close to a year of talking and discussion and so on, it became a reality this morning. And we ought not to take lightly the fact that the vice president of that company, an international company, came all the way to Tobago, 116 square miles of island, 27 by 7, to be part of that signing ceremony. I consider it particularly significant that that kind of outcome could have been generated. And I know sometimes we take these things for granted. And that is why I am taking the opportunity to place that on record. Because it's not easy to engage these institutions and to get that kind of benefit arising out of that engagement. And there was indeed a promise that once this arrangement goes well, that the whole training arrangement can be internationalized, meaning, one, that persons from here can go to China. And more than that, persons from here can go to other foreign countries where that company is doing business. A tremendous achievement.
Thank you for staying with us for the Tobago House of Assembly's Post-Executive Council Media Briefing for the week ending September 8th, 2018.